welcome everybody, and I'd just firstly like to acknowledge that certainly I'm on the land of the Gadigal and Bidjigal people here in Sydney, and very keen to pay my respects to their elders, both from millennia of the kind of 60,000 years probably or more of storytelling and creative expression and community on these lands. To those elders present and coming into that leadership as well. And a special welcome to any First Nations people listening from anywhere. I have two special guests here, Justin Kurzel and Essie Davis, both NIDA graduates, and I think just missed each other at NIDA, I think. Essie, her final year in acting was 1992, so graduated in that year, and pretty quickly hit her straps, going into a string of shows at Bell Shakespeare, 5 or 6, I think, in a row there, straight out of school. And then won an Olivier Award for her performance as Stella in Streetcar Named Desire, opposite Glenn Close and directed by Trevor Nunn, which was pretty great. And then a Tony nomination the year after for Jumpers, opposite Simon Russell Beale, I think it was. And then, of course, a lot of great television and film. Babadook, Miss Fisher, of course, both on television and film, and Lambs of God and Baby Teeth, and of course Justin's most recent film, The True History of the Kelly Gang. Justin studied design at NIDA and graduated in '95, and again, hit his straps pretty quickly with a string of shows at Sydney Theatre Company and Bell Shakespeare and a couple of other companies as well, including Belvoir, before leaving stage design aside and studying film at BCA, and then of course 4 features to his name so far: Snowtown, Macbeth, Assassin's Creed, and True History of the Kelly Gang. So I guess I've got to ask you both first when you might have met. Which you just missed each other at NIDA, I think. And I have a feeling it would have been at Belvoir. Is that right?
Yeah, it was the Arthur Miller play, View from a Bridge, which we'd done in our 3rd year. I designed, Adam Cook had directed, and literally it was like January that the year
before 1996.
That we met, and Essie was playing Catherine. In the play. So it was pretty quick out of NIDA for me. And
was that your first job straight out of NIDA?
No, I was doing Pentecost with Rodney Fisher, so we get pretty much straight away.
What memories do you have of each other in that rehearsal room?
I did a really bad costume drawing of Catherine with a it was probably one of my worst, and I just remember Essie laughing at the drawing and how terrible it was. She's a pretty. I remember her being a real force, and I was pretty taken by sort of straight away. I'm pretty nervous about being around her. And also that I had to cut your hair. She had this incredible long red hair, sort of down to her bottom, and she was playing you're playing Italian.
Yeah, and one of Catherine's lines in the play is about her cousin, and she says, "Oh my God, he's practically blonde." So I couldn't be practically blonde. I had to be proper brunette Italian.
Yeah, so I was sort of when she had her hair dyed and hair cut, and
it was my first hair dye ever.
So she was pretty emotional about it. So we connected over hair, David.
And costume, and set. He did the whole lot, and he was pretty extraordinary. I have to say, his production design was extraordinary. And I only laughed at the drawing because I knew it was of the actress who had played her at NIDA, and it wasn't.
What memories, Essie, do you have of Justin in that first period?
I thought he was he was always very gentle and articulate, and a really felt like a really wise and positive, calm person in the rehearsal room. He was in the rehearsal room a lot. So I remember whenever I wasn't on, I'd be often sitting behind him, and I'd look at the shape of his head and his concentration and think, that man's got a nice skull.
I can't believe we're talking about this.
Anyway, he was always really very fastidious and detailed about his work, but also very gentle and respectful, and really held my hand through like quite a strange transformation. It was the first time I'd ever dyed my hair, and consequently have had to do so ever since. However, I just thought he was a really interesting and very funny and talented and wise, quiet presence.
Yeah, I mean, you got together pretty quickly and then married in 2002, I think it was. Something like that. Yeah. Justin, you mentioned Essie's laugh there pretty quickly. And of course, Essie's pretty well known for her laughter. But it strikes me, Essie, that on stage and on screen, actually, you've done a lot of crying in the roles you've had. I think it's fair to say, is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, but yet as a person, you're actually rather different to that. And I was struck by a comment you made about the true history of the Kelly Gang and about what that film was about. And you thought that film was about a curse, about how we fight not to become the things that we're cornered into becoming, was your thought on the film. And I'm interested in if that rings true in terms of your own career a little bit, you know, given that, you know, on the surface at least, many of the roles you've come to play are actually kind of not actually necessarily reflective of you as a personality.
I guess, although there's lots about myself I like, I would have to say that I've always been someone who's been more interested in other people and in the way other people tick and how other lives work. And I've always really I tried to do something that challenges myself every time. I really get bored of repeating myself. So I really love becoming another person. I thoroughly enjoy inhabiting a different human's brain and skin and way of being, just to give me a break from myself, I guess. But and I guess I've always sought to do that. And I have had great, fairly early on in my career, being able to break the typecasting that was beginning to come my way. And you know, sometimes I'd be asked to audition for a particular character in a job, and I would request if I could audition for the character that was a different character than the one they were asking me for. And that often changed things up for me in my career, because all of a sudden I was seen as, okay, she's not this distraught crying person. She's brave and bold, and, you know, or she's funny. And so I think that also requires some dexterity in the choices that you get, that you can then make within choices that you're given.
I guess that's what I was getting at. And I'm guessing, you know, when Miss Fisher came along, that would have given you a particular pleasure, because it was a character outside of what you would normally be doing.
Because she wasn't crying all the time. Yeah. Yes. And that came to me actually out of playing Anouk, which is the character that I had actually asked. I said when I was asked to audition for the character of Rosie, I said I will audition for it, but can I also audition for the character of Anouk? Because
In the slap.
In the slap.
Mm.
And they agreed, and then they had a nice fight over which character I could play, so that was good fun. But because of that, playing Anouk, then the ABC wanted me for Miss Fisher to see me, and that there is something that is so sort of buoyant and joyous and delightful and old-fashioned in terms of theatricality and dexterity that my history in theatre and my love of old black and white movies and old British comedy, that I got the opportunity to sort of be in that kind of really positive, hopeful and quite aesthetically large theatrical world, I guess.
An extraordinary show, I've got to say, and movie. Justin, I want to ask you much the same kind of question in a way, about, finding to become, something that, or finding not to become something that you'd been cornered into becoming. And you went to NIDA pretty early, I think straight out of high school into design, I think into NIDA. Right, so you were very young when you were there.
Yeah, I was 18, 19 when I went to NIDA.
Yeah. And then, in those, when you were practicing as a stage designer straight out of NIDA, you became very much top of your profession pretty quickly and, sat there for a good 6 or 7 years. But then decided, no, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to study film. Went back to film school and have now become a great film director. So I wonder what that process was like for you. Essie's talked about, some ways of kind of getting out of typecasting, to use Essie's phrase. But what about you? Did you feel typecast in any kind of way as a stage designer?
No, look, it was, I think I was just too young I think I was too young when I sort of went to NIDA and also sort of came out. I sort of, it was such a high pressured situation and, and especially after sort of graduating from NIDA, it was a massive learning curve for me, to work with people like yourself and, Rodney and Benedict Andrews and, like some pretty formidable minds. In one sense, I had a massive growth spurt in regards to just education and looking at the world in a very different place and having to kind of stand up very quickly on a stage. And but I sort of was also at that time desperately trying to kind of find myself and kind of who I was and what I was sort of interested in. But it was, I just loved being in rehearsals and I loved being around actors and I was becoming more and more curious about performance. And I loved that part of coming up with the vision of a play. That was my favorite part of designing, was sort of sitting with the director and kind of, so I thought it got to be fantastic to kind of combine all those things where, I was working with actors, but that I was able to kind of keep, finding vision for ideas and stories. And film was just something I was really interested in. I was terrified about being a director in theatre. I thought that, I just thought I'd get a hiding and I hadn't seen many designers successfully sort of leap into directing in theatre. And also I just had so much respect and thought it was such a really tricky thing. Whereas in film, it felt like a fresh start and a kind of plate where I could maybe sort of scratch an itch a little bit with some of the stuff. But it was pretty daunting. I remember sort of stopping design while I was starting to get offered some pretty amazing operas and basically becoming unemployed. And for a good sort of 2-3 years there, finding it really difficult to sort of just get in. So it was, in a weird way, it was sort of dismantling this career that I'd spent a lot of time developing. And not really knowing whether there was going to be any light at the end of the tunnel in terms of film directing and what that was. I got rejected from AFTRS twice. you know, I was sort of living in London with Essie when she was sort of winning Olivia Awards and stuff, and I was sort of like completely lost. And so there was definitely a period there where I went, what the hell have I done? But it did actually allow me to kind of find myself as an artist, even though it was a different medium. It did sort of allow me to come out of the shadow of a lot of people, which I think was really important in terms of my own confidence and curiosity in art.
Yeah, and finding your own voice, as you say, and you know, and you've very, very distinctly found your voice, of course, as a film director. And we'll talk about that in a moment. You talked about your love of acting there, and I think that's really interesting, because you're well known for, you know, your love of actors and the acting process. And it's interesting when you, on the surface of it, when you think of a designer moving into film direction, you think it wouldn't be about the acting, it would be about the visuals. You have a very distinct visual palette. We'll talk about that later. But I'll ask you both, you know, you both worked together on a couple of Justin's films. You know, the detailed processes you go through with actors, you know, creating those, you know, Bibles in a way of research and character study, you know, before rehearsal, and, you know, which strikes me as being very, you know, unusual, I think, for film directors, I think. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And maybe, Essie, your experience of that, of Justin's relationship with actors?
Well, I think one thing that is brilliant bravery in his actors, that and an openness to a new world that may not have instinctively occurred to you, or that may not be the obvious research path that you might go down as an actor, especially if you're playing a real person in any history. So he has always been an incredible problem solver, and if there is any kind of obstacle, he's got a really amazing brain that just looks around corners and goes, what if we look at this in a whole new world, in a whole new way? And when he first moved into directing and he did his first feature film, the bravest thing that he did, considering his love of actors and his knowledge of how pliable we are,
was to not work with actors.
was to choose not work with actors, but to actually go, no actors can do this. I'm actually going to cast all real people.
Yeah.
Yes, in Snowtown, I'm going to cast people from the area, and I'm going to find the people who embody what I want them to do, because I don't want it to be a bunch of Australian actors we know performing these roles that are not of this, that are not of a theatrical world. They are of a very Australian earthed kind of world that Justin actually grew up in and around. So that kind of level of bravery of going, nah, I'm not going to get any actors to play these really emotional scenes and huge character arcs and journeys to go on, that for him to go, I can get this performance out of a person I find, who the right person I find in this community, is a pretty brave thing to do, and daring. And if he had failed, it would have been a massive learning curve. It still was a massive learning curve, but he succeeded. And Lou Harris, is that her name? She won Best Actress at the Actor Awards that year, and Daniel did too, didn't he? Win Best Actor.
Yep.
And Daniel, who Justin cast in as the only actor who was sort of coming into this world, had never done film before. And I think, and what Justin does is give you like a manifesto of ways to think, things to try, things to do, ways to people to emulate, music to listen to, documentaries to watch, sports to watch, sport ways.
I've got to say though that a lot of that comes from theatre, David. Like a lot of it, you know, there's a real culture in the UK of theatre directors becoming film directors, and it makes complete sense to me. And I haven't worked out why it doesn't happen more in Australia. In that, you know, you being a theatre director, and for me it was a theatre design. You're just constantly surrounded by actors. You know, they're not foreign things, and I've found that most film directors are actually really intimidated by actors because they've got into the world of directing, you know, either through kind of graphic design or, you know, they're a second AD and it was something really important to be able to be in a rehearsal for 8 weeks and to kind of see the play that happens and that, you know, a lot of the process of directing actors in theatre is about doing. It's about, you know, getting on the floor and just doing. So that became a huge kind of foundation for me in regards to being quite focused on actors sort of doing more and a lot less kind of analytical talk, and because you don't have much time in film. It's you might be lucky to get 2 or 3 weeks of rehearsal, and so it you know, that idea to be able to be quite flexible and nimble and just really love being around actors is actually a kind of rarity that happens in film. I think it's quite different from theatre.
Yeah, I think you're a rare film director to have that kind of level of interest, I guess, and comfort with actors.
Yeah, I think that's because of being around them for so long in theatre and loving it, and you know, it is surprising that it doesn't happen more. You know,
but at the same time, you know, you have a really highly developed visual sense as a film director, you know, in particular the landscape. I mean, all your films, you know, are just full of extraordinary landscapes, all 4 of them.
Yeah.
And in terms of your own voice, which we've been talking a lot about today, you know, not only is landscape very much part of all those films, but, you know, they're all about kinds of masculinity. They're all about warriors. All 4 of those films are they're all war films in a sense.
Yeah.
They're all, is that part of your voice, that these apparently 4 quite different films are all about war and men? Like, is that part of your voice?
I think it has to be. I guess I guess I've got to do something else. Well, look, I think that stemmed from Snowtown. You know, I think that you know, going back to South Australia and going back to where I grew up, and, you know, being surrounded by that sort of masculinity, and sort of reconnecting with that, but in a different way. I think definitely kind of steered me towards a focus in film that was different than what I was interested in theatre. So, and yeah, I'm interested in fate and destiny. I'm interested in kind of what happens. You know, what are you able to kind of shift and determine a different fate to the one that maybe you're handed, and that's been a common thing through kind of my films, and I think masculinity has been a huge part of that as well. But I think that grew. You know, I think like Macbeth, I never ever thought I would make a film. You know, I realised how hard it was as a stage production, but it's just really interesting how things happen and timing happens, and, you know, you do a piece that is about a corruption of innocence and about a kind of kid heading towards a kind of evil that he can't sort of turn, and it is about masculinity and sexuality, and then you've just come off that and done a very particular Australian film with 9 actors, and then suddenly you're doing Macbeth in the UK, and yeah, you start to you've still got the shadow of that previous film, and it starts to rub off, and you start seeing a whole lot of things in it. I think also for me it was landscape there. You know, I was just completely seduced by the idea of doing Macbeth in Scotland and Skye and the landscape and it being a Western and the sort of what that kind of meant to the verse. So I think I obviously unconsciously am attracted to a particular kind of type of story, but I do think that they all start to bleed a bit. That things sort of overlap, and you know, definitely True History was a connection back to things that I was still exploring in Snowtown, that I was sort of fascinated by. But yeah, there is something about, you know, there is something about a toxic male kind of energy there that I think, yeah, it does sort of lend itself back to you know, where I grew up in my childhood. And,
yeah, I think they're all
find out about me, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, yeah, that's my observation too. And it's interesting you talk about your home and childhood and so on, because I think for you, Essie, you know, part of your voice as an artist is kind of rooted in Tasmania too. And it's interesting, after, you know, all that work in Australia and London, New York, you know, you set up a theatre company in Hobart.
Oh, well, I can't take credit for that. I launched the theatre company. I was just the person who cut the ribbon. I'm sorry.
You've spent a lot of time in recent years in Tasmania and been involved in all sorts of things in Tasmanian culture, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very important place to me, and I have a very profound connection to this land and my family here, and now Justin does too, and our children. We all have this is a place that I guess always feels like home, and we've always juggled that, having an international career and where you have to be to do that, and have lived in many cities around the world, and many of them are fantastic cities to live in. But also, I guess we've always tried to really balance that, I guess, nurturing, self-nurturing family, spiritual life with creativity and a big sort of world careers. And I think, I mean, we're not necessarily going to stay here forever, but it feels like a really earthed place to come home to and replenish and keep creating from, I guess.
Well, I hope you're both doing a lot of replenishing there and at this time. And it was really great to talk with you both as part of this live broadcast. So thank you both very much. Talk to you soon. Thanks so much.